Communication happens every day in business, but some communication moments matter far more than others. Do you know what those moments are for you? Get them right and your business is on the path to flourishing. Get them wrong, your business is in trouble, whether you are a solopreneur or whether you're leading a team or a massive operation. Let's dig into what those moments are and how to use them to bring the change that you want to see in your business, in your life, and in the world around you. Welcome to the Story Greenlight podcast, where we're all about helping professional advisors tell your stories so that you can serve more clients and expand your impact in the world. My name is Jeff Bartsch. I am a communicator and marketing strategist with over 20 years of experience working with ABC, NBC, Universal, Disney, Apple, and thousands of students and clients around the world. At Story Greenlight, we believe that real people trust real people and that human connection is everything. In part one of this two-part series, I talked about the idea of fluffy communication that doesn't have a huge impact, like emails saying, "Hey everyone, there are donuts in the kitchen, go have fun and eat lots of sugar," and all that sort of a thing. And I started thinking about what communication moments actually do have a huge impact. And I ended up talking with my wife, Chantel, about moments in our relationship. And we realized that high impact communication is always attached to specific moments in time. Here's the list that we came up with: beginnings, big requests, conflict, transitions, and endings. And the more we talked about this, the more I realized that those core moments don't just happen in personal relationships, they happen in business too. I talked about the beginnings and big requests in part one. So if you haven't heard that yet, make sure you check that out first. Otherwise, buckle up because we are about to jump into the stormy waters of conflict. In any relationship, be it business or personal, you always have a beginning, some kind of introduction. And if things work from there, usually you come to a big request or some way of taking things to the next level. Now, if that happens, then sometimes everything works and everyone goes home happy, or things continue on and everyone's happy and all that kind of thing. But anytime you are dealing with any kind of extended engagement between two or more human beings, you are going to come to a point where somebody's not going to agree on something, and eventually you're going to run into conflict. Now, conflict can have a range of messages. It can be on the destructive side of things in terms of this isn't working, or this sucks, or worse, you suck. What were you thinking? What are you thinking? That kind of a thing. It can also range to the other side of being constructive, to say, hey, let's figure this out, or let's fix this. So I'm just going to go in that kind of an optimistic message because that's the kind of guy that I am. So let's say that conflict is a moment where we're saying, let's fix this, or we are seeking to say, let's fix this. And when it comes to how this comes about, there is one monstrously large source of conflict, and that is unmet expectations. Somebody promised something that isn't happening, or someone isn't getting what they want. I once heard the definition of happiness described like this: when your expectations match with your reality. Hence, the reverse of that would be unhappiness, or in many cases, conflict, when expectations don't match with reality. So if you expect nothing and you have nothing, you're good. You're going to be happy. If you expect something but you don't have it, chances are good that you are not happy. And at that point, some people say, well, I'm going to change the way things are to match my expectations. And off they go, and they're fine. And some people might say, okay, well, this is not the way things are, therefore I'm going to change my expectations, and then that will match with the way things actually are, and I'll be happy. And often that involves lowering our expectations. And sometimes there's a time for that. Often there's a time for that, but not always. And there are others that will say, well, I still want what I want, and I expect others to change instead of me. Others will say, I'm working to change the way things are, but other people get in the way. And that is where conflict pops up. So conflict definitely plays a significant role in personal relationships. When Chantel and I were dating, we took we did some premarital counseling, and we took this pre-marriage profile. And the person reviewing our results said that our communication scores in these different areas of this profile that we were looking at, he said that our communication scores were the highest he'd ever seen in all the profiles he'd done. And we were surprised to hear that, but not all that surprised, because we were already independent adults established in our individual careers, and we'd already lived a good chunk of our professional single adult life. And I was living in Los Angeles, working in the television industry, and Chantel was living in Cleveland, working in the specialized workers' compensation insurance industry. And so we got lots of practice from the very beginning, because we knew that as independent adults, if this relationship was supposed to happen, then we wanted to know that it was actually going somewhere. And so we decided pretty early on that we are going to work at this, and we're going to talk every day until it becomes clear that there's a future for this or there's not. And we talked every day. And we got a lot of practice communicating with each other. And 13 years later, 13 years after our wedding day, it has been only a handful of days that we haven't talked with each other every single day. Now, having said that, even so, we still have conflict because we're human beings, and human beings have conflict. That's just the way it is. We make a point of, when we are disagreeing about something, we make a point of staying engaged in the process. This was something that came up in our conversation over dinner the initial night when I was first putting these ideas out to Chantel. And she said, do you remember the time when we were dating? We were in my condo here in Ohio, and we were arguing about something, and she didn't even remember what it was. And I had no memory of this scenario at all. So I'm recounting the story as Chantel told it to me. She said, we were in her condo in Ohio. We were arguing about something, and she decided that she was not happy, and she walked away from me when I was talking. And she walked out of the room. And I was not okay with that. As Chantel told me, she said, you walked after me and you said, you're not going to accept that. You're not going to let someone walk away from you while you're talking. You say that that's disrespectful, and we need to keep talking about this and figure it out. And she said that was an important moment for her, because growing up, she had not ever had anyone who, when there was a moment of conflict, called her on her tendency to walk away. Because really, conflict is not comfortable. We don't want to keep ourselves in uncomfortable situations, so it's really tempting to just walk away. But the fact that she realized it's important to stay in this conflict in that moment, and that's something that Jeff expects, then that's something that really was a turning point for her in our communication when it came to conflict. And that's something that's served us well ever since. And this helps us stay aligned. We both verbalize our expectations, and we're both committed to helping each other get what they want. And this is huge for helping us keep our marriage strong, because conflict is not fun. It's not comfortable, but it is absolutely critical. It is absolutely necessary to keeping the air clear between us. And so in business, this is equally important. It happens externally, Just like marketing is one to many and sales is one to one or one to few, business conflict happens the same way. In a one to many thing, it can show up in a PR, in a public relationship context. Something happens with a company leader or an employee or a large public reaction that requires a response. It can happen in a one-to-one customer service context where one customer or client is dealing directly with the company. And sometimes the customer speaks publicly and prompts a need for a public relationship response. So that's the external side of thing in business. Then internally, it happens with employee dissatisfaction. Employees interacting with each other, employees interacting with management or leadership, and it also happens internally with owner and partner disagreements. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of examples of what this might look like, because I'm pretty sure you might have some examples in your mind of where you've been. Because one thing I will say, though, if conflict never happens, beware that, because that usually means that somebody somewhere is not speaking up. If you wait long enough, something will explode, maybe an individual relationship or maybe the entire business. And the good news to this is many times you can head off conflict by better communication in earlier areas, specifically when it comes to setting expectations, which that breakdown, if someone has an expectation and it's not getting met, that is a fundamental starting block for conflict moving forward from there. So just like in a healthy marriage, you can communicate your expectations in the faith that other parties are going to work together so that everyone gets what they want. And this just cuts a lot of conflict off at the knees, just right at the beginning. But when conflict comes, it is really important to face it. And this is where it gets tricky in business, because most times marriages exist within the context of I'm committed to you no matter what. Commitment is huge. The higher the amount of commitment, the more likely people are to be willing to stay in challenging situations. Now, businesses do not have that explicit till death do us part kind of commitment. And in fact, businesses often say, we have no need to stay committed at all. My entire career in Hollywood has been engagements at will. I can end it at any moment, and the client or the production company or the network or whoever can end it at any moment. There is no promise of committed relationship in this. And customers are especially likely to not be committed into businesses, especially if you have a low commitment kind of a product. Well, if they're buying toothpaste, and they don't like something about your toothpaste or your company that makes the toothpaste, they're going to go to another company to buy toothpaste. Or if in recent months, if you happen to have an issue with the company that makes the beer that you drink, and you don't like the company who is drinking who's creating the beer, then you are going to very publicly maybe talk about going to drink a different kind of beer. And that's what's been happening with Anheuser-Busch this year. And so if there is a conflict, let me back up a little bit. It definitely happens with employees saying, no, I don't see a need to stay committed to a business. Whereas in past decades, in past generations, there was an expectation of the company provides you with a job, 40 years of work and a pension, and off you go into your retirement years to do whatever you want in exchange for giving us 40 years of your life. Well, that's not the way the world works anymore. And employees are ever more aware of that, especially since the COVID pandemic and all the soul searching and navel gazing that brought about. So when that conflict happens, the question becomes, do we engage or do we not engage? And Because when you do engage, well, actually either way, at that decision point, that's where change happens. It forces some kind of change, which conflict forces change in stories, and it forces change in life. Sometimes it's a change in understanding. Sometimes it's a change in expectation, and parties adjust accordingly. And this happens all the time, and it becomes water under the bridge, and we move on and we keep doing our thing. Sometimes it turns into something bigger, like a transition or an ending. Now, I'm going to talk about endings here first, because frankly, it would be a bit of a downer to end with it, because frankly, it can get depressing, as you'll see in a bit. But hang in there. There is good news coming too. So we have our conflict, and it can go different directions. And one of those directions is the idea of endings, or the idea of let's stop what we're doing. Now, ending is actually a subset of a transition. It's a kind of transition. Instead of saying, let's go in a different direction and keep going in a different direction, it's let's stop going together, or your time is up. Now, this part might be easy if you are in a low commitment situation. If it's a personal relationship, if it's a friendship or you're dating, it is a lot easier to say, this isn't working, let's just move on. If you are an employee, and if you can easily get a job somewhere else and conflict pops up with employer A, you just leave and you say, I'm out of here, I'm going on to employer B or C or whoever. And certainly if you're a customer, you just take your business elsewhere. Now, the higher the commitment, the higher the involvement of the relationship or the value exchange, if you're talking about that kind of a thing, the harder endings become, because endings in high commitment scenarios are usually chosen by us in the face of significant conflict, which we may or may not have tried to get over or not, or it's forced on us against our will. Sometimes it's conflict from third parties, forces an end, or frankly, maybe somebody dies, maybe even us. Now, in the personal end of things, Chantel and I are happily married, and God willing, we began our marriage saying that we are in this until death do us part, and God willing, that is our intent to continue that until one or both of us dies. So having said that, I also want to be very aware of the fact that many highly committed relationships end. Partners break up, spouses divorce, sometimes even after decades. And sometimes endings are forced suddenly by an accident or a sickness, and other times endings happen slowly, where health deteriorates or minds fade. And, for instance, Chantel lost her mother very slowly to breast cancer. And while they were able to have lots of precious time together before the end was still incredibly painful, and it was drawn out. So at the risk of getting too much of a downer here, the question I want to bring here is, how do we protect against endings in long-term high commitment relationships? And once again, it involves communication. And I will say that some of the most serious communications, some of the most serious conversations that Chantel and I have had are based on the ideas of what if. The ideas around estate planning and questions protecting for that an end of some kind being forced on one or both of us. So what happens to our kids? Who owns or receives what in what priority after we're gone? What happens in the case of difficult health decisions? Prolonged medical treatment and quality of life and all that kind of thing. Life insurance, transfer of assets, and who's responsible for that? Who do we trust for that? And these were not easy conversations, but they are huge supporting our relationship now while we're still here and while everything's still moving ahead. So those what if conversations held ahead of time, incredibly important. And I will also say, it really helps put our minds more at ease in light of the unknown future. So in business, endings can be equally hard. Sometimes they're ended by choice. Sometimes we just don't want to admit that something is done. I will say I still have blogs up on the internet for businesses that I don't run anymore. There are times that partnerships blow up. I've had, I've had joint ventures that didn't work for different reasons. There was one joint venture that it seemed to make sense going into it, but once I actually got into the middle of it and I realized what I was in for, I literally lost all motivation to get out of bed in the morning. And that freaked out Chantel. She said, "Jeff, I've never seen you unmotivated before. What is going on?" So that was when I realized, you know what, this is not the right fit for me, and it's not fair to my joint venture partner to continue going to this. So I requested to end it, and my JV partner was very gracious. And there are other times when one partner insists on the other partner leaving. I mean, that happens in business all the time. You can have an ending in business when employees leave, and businesses like to expect that employees will be around forever. And at one point, that was more of the culture with how the business world works. But more and more businesses are finding these days that that's not the way the world works anymore. And just like with personal relationships, the most important conversations for business endings happen before the ending actually goes down, before the conflict pops up. And that prompts the questions, where do we go from here? So this is why it is so important to have the conversations beforehand, talking about operating agreements with the scope of contract, with insurance policies. And sometimes that's liability insurance for executives or board members. Sometimes it's a key person policy for C-suite members or key employees. Sometimes one of the most important conversations you can have regarding business endings is succession planning. Who takes over? Who's up next when the ending happens, in whatever form? But in spite of all that planning and the safety nets that you set up beforehand, things can still end for other reasons. Markets change and technology changes. You can be a huge department store, an absolute staple of American economy, of your country's economy if you're living outside the United States. You can be built around physical shopping. And next thing you know, these huge department stores they lose business and they're acquired by bigger companies and maybe they survive and maybe they don't, while the rest of the world continues to change and shop digitally. That change happened, and some physical retailers adopted, and some physical retailers adapted and others didn't. Or maybe technology disappears completely and the people who used to invent and install equipment for telegraph lines, they may go out of business, or they may realize that they're not actually in the telegraph business, they're in the communication business. And next thing you know, a company like American Telephone and Telegraph can move beyond its original technology and become AT&T. A digital powerhouse empowering communication around the world. So the opportunity at that point in front of us becomes, what if we don't have to end? What if we could continue and make a transition instead? So here we are in a high commitment scenario. Conflict is here, but we're not ending anything, which means the next step is to make a change or transition. So the idea of transitions, saying, let's go in a different direction. This is usually driven by conflict, which prompts an idea to fix the conflict and a moment discussing that idea. So one of those moments for us personally was when was set up by the fact that I had been living in LA for 20 years, and half of that with Chantel, and towards the ending years also with our kids. And I lived in LA for 20 years, and my physical presence had always been required there, given what I was doing with production companies in the city. And it was just the assumption that you have to get very skilled, very smart people all in the same physical space, connected to the same, working with very powerful computers, connected to the same media servers right there in that building. It cannot be done otherwise. And to make that happen, I had long commutes. There was one point where I was commuting to the opposite side of Los Angeles, and I was doing it on the train, and it took me 2 hours one way. And I did that on purpose because instead of me sitting on the freeway for an hour and a half, I could spend 2 hours going one way, and I could sit on the train or subway, and I could actually work on writing my book, which I did that some years ago. When those commutes happened, though, I left early. I left usually before Chantel got up, usually before the kids got up, when the kids were there. And Chantel had to take care of them by herself. And she got to the point where she was telling me that she felt like a single parent. So that was not something that I wanted to hear, because that is not the husband and the father that I see myself as being, and that is not what I wanted for our family. Unfortunately, it got worse than that, because when I did arrive home, my brain was just shot. I had been making thousands and thousands and thousands of focused decisions all day long down in the city, and I come home and my wife and my kids didn't get, all they got of me was my leftovers. They didn't get my first fruits, they got my leftovers. And so here Chantel was, she's sitting across the table from me, and she's trying to connect with me and tell me about how her day was. She usually just stopped talking and just looked at me sadly because I was falling asleep across the dinner table. And that was not okay. That was just not okay. So when it comes to the year 2020, COVID was in full swing. LA had shut down, and nobody knew how long it would go. Thankfully, the project that I was on at the time had the entire TV series had been shot, and then we were working. Our team was working to put this show together, and so it was already shot. No one else was going to be able to shoot anything else. And the network came to us and said, so we know we told you that you guys don't have air dates for the show yet, but nobody can shoot anything else. And we need content to put on the air. So you guys have air dates. So this whole remote thing, you better figure it out now, because you now have air dates. Go. So the entire industry decided that the stuff that we said could never be done remotely, now, all of a sudden, it had to be done remotely, thanks to outside forces. Thank you, worldwide pandemic. And so all of 2020, after the first few months, everything after that was already working remotely. And I, during that time, didn't have to commute anymore. And that was amazing. I started seeing improvements in my energy. I was able to be more present with Chantel. I was able to see her and the kids at different points during the day. And the thought crossed my mind, why not work? I mean, we're already working remotely here. Why not work remotely outside California? So Chantel and I sat down and we had a conversation. And I said, what if we could move closer to family so Chantel gets more support, and we will have those relationships available, more support for Chantel. I can keep doing remote work with my clients and with the production companies back in LA, and I would put a permanent end to that damn commute time and be more present for my family at home and my wife across the dinner table. And plus, in the middle of all that craziness, We had a good chunk of equity in our house, in our California house, and that would buy us more time in terms of what was going to happen in all the COVID craziness. So that's what we decided to do. We sold our house. We moved closer to family in Cleveland. And now, as companies are insisting that employees return to the office, our family income is fully remote. Our housing costs dropped by half, and the quality of life has gone way up. And people are all of a sudden realizing that good people are good people, whether they are in the office next door in the physical building, or whether they're across the country or on the other side of the world. So it's been an incredibly positive thing. It's been an incredibly positive transition for us. And it all started with a conversation. We have conflict. Here are the challenges in front of us. Here's a potential solution. And what do you think? This, of course, also applies to business. The idea of let's go in a different direction. Current scenario is not working. Let's change something. And these are important moments. Much more, usually they're much more customized, and they're usually more focused. In these moments, they're usually more focused towards smaller audiences. It usually starts internally, the corollary of me speaking with Chantel, what if we did this? And it explores outward from there. And in business, it starts internally, then spreads internally, then it might move externally through marketing and PR, et cetera. In his classic business book, Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about the Kimberly-Clark company. And they were known for making paper, as in the kind of paper that you'd write on or you'd type on, put into a copy machine, that kind of a thing, in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And in the year 1971, the company was doing okay, but it was 36-ish% behind the general market, and it was just known as a stodgy paper company selling a commodity product. And so their CEO, Darwin Smith, joined Kimberly-Clark as CEO in 1971, and he knew that something had to change. I mean, the role of the CEO is to lead the company in a new direction and increase the share prices for the shareholders. He knew that there had to be a big change for that to happen. So at that time, the core business of Kimberly-Clark was paper mills, making commodity products, and paper mills those paper mills were actually running at a loss. So they were losing money while creating a commodity product that there wasn't much upside to this. So he said, let's move in a new direction. And he said, we are going to sell the paper mills. He even ended up having the namesake paper mill in Kimberly, Wisconsin, sold. They moved out of paper products, and they invested the proceeds from selling those paper mills into consumer products like Huggies and Kleenex. Can you imagine the conversations that Darwin Smith had with his board? Dude, you're turning your back on the core identity of what this company is. This is our history. This is our identity. This is who we are. Sell the mills? You have to be crazy. And the public reactions were equally strong. You have to be kidding us. And this not only is crazy, this is reckless and stupid. And Wall Street downgraded the company's stock. Of course, if you have read Good to Great, you know that Darwin Smith stuck to his guns, and Kimberly-Clark not only turned around its performance, it absolutely exploded, and it became a dominating company in its category. It all started with an awareness of conflict and an idea to resolve that conflict and conversations sharing that idea. Those conversations ended up in a new direction with incredible results. It is true, not all communication is created equal. But if we recognize those critical moments and focus on communicating well in those moments and before those critical moments, we will be well set up to move together through beginnings, the idea of let's start something, big requests, let's go to the next level, conflicts, let's fix this, and maybe conflict becomes an ending, let's end this, because the truth is, all things come to an end. Every end signals a new beginning. It's the way the world works. It's the way things are. But maybe instead of ending, those conflicts can bring on a transition. Let's move in a different direction. And that is the note that I'd like to end on, because while we're all still here, we all have the opportunity to change. Change the way we think, change the things we're saying so that we can change what we're doing and bring change to our business, to our lives, and to the world around us. If you would like help taking these ideas and bringing change into your business, check out the show notes or the video description for tools to help you shape your own strategic communication moments or to get customized guidance from my team and I. And here's to communication that brings people together. Because as we always say here at Story Greenlight, real people trust real people, and human connection is everything.